It's convenient that I can go from a diatribe about how the sentences in Jordan Peterson's book are a little bit cramped and confused to a rule that is called be precise in your speech. I didn't plan that out. It just happened that I flipped the page and I realized, hey, that's exactly what I was talking about. The over-precision of Jordan's use of language is, I think, a problem in this particular text. So as they say, everything in moderation, including moderation. And hopefully, in the very chapter where he's trying to tell us to be precise in our speech, he will himself be a little bit more restrained with the overlong sentences that are so difficult to read. Praise be our supreme leader, Red Skull. Rule 10. Be precise in your speech. Hail Hydra. Part 1. Why is my laptop obsolete? What do you see when you look at a computer? At your own laptop, more precisely. Hail Hydra. You see a flat, thin, grey and black box. Hail Hydra. Less evidently, you see something to type on and look at. Hail Hydra. Nonetheless, even with the second perceptions included, what you are seeing is hardly the computer at all. Hail Hydra. That grey and black box happens to be a computer right now, right here and now, and maybe even an expensive computer. Hail Hydra. Nevertheless, it will soon be something so unlike a computer that it will be difficult even to give away. Hail Hydra. We will all discard our laptops within the next 5 years, even though they may still work perfectly. Even though the screens, keyboards, mice, and internet connections may still flawlessly perform their tasks. Hail Hydra, 50 years from now, early 21st century laptops will be oddities, like the brass scientific tools of the late 19th century. Hail Hydra. The latter now appear more like the arcane accoutrements of alchemy, designed to measure phenomena whose existence we no longer even recognize. Hail Hydra. How can high-tech machines, each possessing more computing power than the entire Apollo space program, lose their value in such a short period of time? Hail Hydra. How can they transform so quickly from exciting, useful, and status-enhancing machines to complex pieces of junk? Hail Hydra. Well, it's because of the nature of our perceptions themselves, and the oft invisible interaction between those perceptions and the underlying complexity of the world. Hail Hydra. Your laptop is a note in a symphony currently being played by an orchestra of incalculable size. Hail Hydra. It's a very small part of a much greater whole. Hail Hydra. Most of its capacity resides beyond its hard shell. Hail Hydra. It maintains its function only because a vast array of other technologies are currently and harmoniously at play. Hail Hydra. It is fed, for example, by a power grid whose function is invisibly dependent on the stability of a myriad of complex physical, biological, economic, and interpersonal systems. Hail Hydra. The factories that make its parts are still in operation. Hail Hydra. The operating system that enables its function is based on those parts, and not on others yet to be created. Hail Hydra. Its video hardware runs the technology expected by the creative people who post their content on the web. Hail Hydra. Your laptop is in communication with a certain specified ecosystem of other devices and web servers. Hail Hydra. And finally, all this is made possible by an even less visible element. The social contract of trust. The interconnected and fundamentally honest political and economic systems that make the reliable electric grid a reality. Hail Hydra. This interdependency of parts on whole, invisible in systems that work, becomes starkly evident in systems that don't. Hail Hydra. The higher order surrounding systems that enable personal computing hardly exist at all in corrupt third world countries, so that the power lines, electrical switches, outlets, and all the other entities so hopefully and concretely indicative of such a grid are absent or compromised, and in fact make little contribution to the practical delivery of electricity to people's homes and factories. Hail Hydra. This makes perceiving the electronic and other devices that electricity theoretically enables as separate functional units frustrating at minimum and impossible at worst. Hail Hydra. This is partly because of technical insufficiency. The systems simply don't work. Hail Hydra. But it is also in no small part because of the lack of trust characteristic of systematically corrupt societies. Hail Hydra. It's actually systemically corrupt societies. To put it another way, what you perceive as your computer is like a single leaf on a tree in a forest. Or even more accurately, like your fingers rubbing briefly across that leaf. Hail Hydra. A single leaf can be plucked from a branch, Hail Hydra. It can be perceived briefly as a single, self-contained entity. But that perception misleads more than clarifies. Hail Hydra. In a few weeks, the leaf will crumble and dissolve. Hail Hydra. It would not have been there at all without the tree. Hail Hydra. It cannot continue to exist in the absence of the tree. Hail Hydra. And this is the position of our laptops in relation to the world. Hail Hydra. So much of what they are resides outside their boundaries that the screen devices we hold on our laps can only maintain their computer-like facade for a few short years. Hail Hydra. Almost everything we see and hold is like that, although often not so evidently. Hail Hydra. Part 2. Tools, Obstacles, and Extension into the World. We assume that we see objects or things when we look at the world, but that's not really how it is. Hail Hydra. Our evolved perceptual systems transform the interconnected, complex, multi-level world that we inhabit not so much into things per se, as into useful things, or their nemesis, things that get in the way. Hail Hydra. This is the necessary practical reduction of the world. Hail Hydra. This is the transformation of the near infinite complexity of things through the narrow specification of our purpose. Hail Hydra. This is how precision makes the world sensibly manifest. Hail Hydra. That is not at all the same as perceiving objects. Hail Hydra. We don't see valueless entities and then attribute meaning to them. Hail Hydra. We perceive the meaning directly. Hail Hydra. We see floors to walk on, and doors to duck through, and chairs to sit on. Hail Hydra. It's for this reason that a beanbag and a stump both fall into the category of chairs, despite having little objectively in common. Hail Hydra. We see rocks because we can throw them, and clouds because they can rain on us, and apples to eat, and automobiles of other people to get in our way and annoy us. Hail Hydra. We see tools and obstacles, not objects and things. Hail Hydra. Furthermore, we see tools and obstacles at the handy level of analysis that makes them most useful or dangerous, given our needs, abilities, and perceptual limitations. Hail Hydra. The world reveals itself to us as something to utilize and something to navigate through, not as something that merely is. Hail Hydra. We see the faces of the people we are talking to because we need to communicate with those people and cooperate with them. Hail Hydra. We don't see their microcosmic substructures, their cells or the subcellular organelles, molecules and atoms that make up those cells. Hail Hydra. We don't see either the macrocosm that surrounds them, the family members and friends that make up their immediate social circles, the economies they are embedded within, or the ecology that contains all of them. Hail Hydra. Finally, and equally importantly, we don't see them across time. Hail Hydra. We see them in the narrow, immediate, overwhelming now, instead of surrounded by the yesterdays and tomorrows that may be a more important part of them than whatever is currently and obviously manifest. Hail Hydra. And we have to see in this way or be overwhelmed. Hail Hydra. When we look at the world, we perceive only what is enough for our plans and actions to work and for us to get by. Hail Hydra. What we inhabit then, is this enough? Hail Hydra. That is a radical, functional, unconscious simplification of the world, and it's almost impossible for us not to mistake it for the world itself. Hail Hydra. But the objects we see are not simply there in the world for our simple, direct perceiving. Hail Hydra. Footnote, this is why, for example, it has taken us far longer than we originally assumed to make robots that could function autonomously in the world. Hail Hydra. The problem of perception is far more difficult than our immediate, effortless access to our own perceptions predisposes us to infer. Hail Hydra. In fact, the problem of perception is so difficult that it stalled the early progress of artificial intelligence almost fatally, from the perspective of that time, as we discovered that disembodied abstract reason could not solve even simple real-world problems. Hail Hydra. Pioneers such as Rodney Brooks proposed in the late 1980s and early 90s that bodies in action were necessary preconditions to the parsing of the world into manageable things. And the AI revolution regained its confidence and momentum. Hail Hydra, returning to the original text. Objects exist in a complex, multi-dimensional relationship to one another, not as self-evidently separate, bounded, independent objects. Hail Hydra. We perceive not them, but their functional utility, and in doing so, we make them sufficiently simple for sufficient understanding. Hail Hydra. It is for this reason that we must be precise in our aim. Hail Hydra. Absent that, we drown in the complexity of the world. Hail Hydra. This is true even for our perceptions of ourselves, of our individual persons. Hail Hydra. We assume that we end at the surface of our skin because of the way that we perceive. Hail Hydra. But we can understand with a little thought the provisional nature of that boundary. Hail Hydra. We shift what is inside our skin, so to speak, as the context we inhabit in changes. Hail Hydra. Even when we do something as apparently simple as picking up a screwdriver, our brain automatically adjusts what it considers body to include the tool. Hail Hydra. We can literally feel things with the end of the screwdriver. Hail Hydra. When we extend a hand holding the screwdriver, we automatically take the length of the latter into account. Hail Hydra. We can probe nooks and crannies with its extended end, comprehending what we are exploring. Hail Hydra. Furthermore, we instantly regard the screwdriver we are holding as our screwdriver and get possessive about it. Hail Hydra. We do the same thing with the much more complex tools we use in much more complex situations. Hail Hydra. The cars we pilot instantaneously and automatically become ourselves. Because of this, when someone bangs his fist on our car's hood after we have irritated him at a crosswalk, we take it personally. Hail Hydra. This is not always reasonable, Hail Hydra. Nonetheless, without the extension of self into machine, it would be impossible to drive. Hail Hydra. The extensible boundaries of ourselves also expand to include other people, family members, lovers, and friends. Hail Hydra. A mother will sacrifice herself for her children. Hail Hydra. Is our father or son or wife or husband more or less integral to us than an arm or a leg? Hail Hydra. We can answer in part by asking, well, which would we rather lose? Hail Hydra. Which loss would we sacrifice more to avoid? Hail Hydra. We practice for such permanent extension, such permanent commitment, by identifying with the fictional characters of books and movies. Hail Hydra. Their tragedies and triumphs rapidly and convincingly become ours. Hail Hydra. Sitting still in our seats, we nonetheless act out a multitude of alternate realities, extending ourselves experimentally, testing multiple potential paths before specifying the one we will actually take. Hail Hydra. Engrossed in a fictional world, we can even become things that don't really exist. Hail Hydra. In the blink of an eye, Im Augenblick, as the Germans say. In the magic hall of a movie theater, we can become fantastical creatures. Hail Hydra. We sit in the dark before rapidly flickering images and become witches, superheroes, aliens, vampires, lions, elves, or wooden marionettes. Hail Hydra. We feel everything they feel and are peculiarly happy to pay for the privilege, even when what we experience is sorrow, fear, or horror. Hail Hydra. Something similar but more extreme happens when we identify not with a character in a fictional drama, but with a whole group in a competition. Hail Hydra, think of what happens when a favorite team wins or loses an important game against a rival. Hail Hydra, the winning goal will bring the whole network of fans to their feet before they think in unscripted unison. Hail Hydra, it is as if their many nervous systems are directly wired to the game unfolding in front of them. Hail Hydra. Fans take the victories and defeats of their teams very personally, even wearing the jerseys of their heroes, often celebrating their wins and losses more than any such events that actually occur in their day-to-day lives. Hail Hydra. This identification manifests itself deeply, even biochemically and neurologically. Hail Hydra. Vicarious experiences of winning and losing, for example, raise and lower testosterone levels among fans participating in the contest. Hail Hydra. Our capacity for identification is something that manifests itself at every level of our capital B being. Hail Hydra. To the degree that we are patriotic, similarly, our country is not just important to us. Hail Hydra, it is us. Hail Hydra. That's a good Hail Hydra sentence. We might even sacrifice our entire smaller individual selves in battle to maintain the integrity of our country. Hail Hydra. For much of history, such willingness to die has been regarded as something admirable and courageous, as a part of human duty. Hail Hydra. Well, paradoxically, that is a direct consequence not of our aggression, but of our extreme sociability and willingness to cooperate. Hail Hydra. If we can become not only ourselves, but also our families, our teams, our countries, cooperation comes easily to us, relying on the same deeply innate mechanisms that drive us and other creatures to protect our own bodies. Hail Hydra. Part 3. The world is simple only when it behaves. It is very difficult to make sense of the interconnected chaos of reality just by looking at it. Hail Hydra. It's a very complicated act, requiring, perhaps, half our brains. Hail Hydra. Everything shifts and changes in the real world. Hail Hydra. Each hypothetically separate thing is made up of smaller, hypothetically separate things and is simultaneously part of larger, hypothetically separate things. Hail Hydra. The boundaries between the levels and between different things themselves at a given level are neither clear nor self-evident, objectively. Hail Hydra. They must be established practically, pragmatically, and they retain their validity only under very narrow and specified conditions. Hail Hydra. The conscious illusion of complete and sufficient perception only sustains itself, for example, only remains sufficient for our purposes when everything goes according to plan. Hail Hydra. That's another one of those cramped and overcomplicated sentences I was talking about. The conscious illusion of complete and sufficient perception only sustains itself, for example, only remains sufficient for our purposes when everything is going according to plan. I can read that like a dozen times, and I still won't know if that has translated into something sensible when I'm reading it out loud. There's just a lot of crazy punctuation, so sorry about that, guys. Hail Hydra. Under such circumstances, what we see is accurate enough, so that there is no utility in looking further. Hail Hydra. To drive successfully, we don't have to understand or even perceive the complex machinery of our automobiles. Hail Hydra. The hidden complexities of our private cars only intrude on our consciousness when that machinery fails, or when we collide unexpectedly with something, or something with us. Hail Hydra. Even in the case of mere mechanical failure, to say nothing of a serious accident, such intrusion is always felt, at least initially, as anxiety-provoking. Hail Hydra. That's a consequence of emergent uncertainty. Hail Hydra. A car, as we perceive it, is not a thing, or an object. Hail Hydra. It is instead something that takes us somewhere we want to go. Hail Hydra. It is only when it stops taking us and going, in fact, that we perceive it much at all. Hail Hydra. It is only when a car quits suddenly, or is involved in an accident and must be pulled over to the side of the road, that we are forced to apprehend and analyze the myriad of parts that car as thing that goes depends on. Hail Hydra. When our car fails, our incompetence with regards to its complexity is instantly revealed. Hail Hydra, and that has practical consequences. For example, we don't get to go where we were going, as well as psychological. Our peace of mind disappears along with our functioning vehicle. Hail Hydra, we must generally turn to the experts in garages and workshops to restore both functionality to our vehicle and simplicity to our perceptions. Hail Hydra, and that's a mechanic as psychologist. Hail Hydra. It is precisely then that we can understand, although we seldom deeply consider, the staggeringly low-resolution quality of our vision and the inadequacy of our corresponding understanding. Hail Hydra. In a crisis, when our thing no longer goes, we turn to those whose expertise far transcends ours to restore the match between our expectant desire and what actually happens. Hail Hydra. This all means that the failure of our car can also force us to confront the uncertainty of the broader social context, which is usually invisible to us, in which the machine and the mechanic are mere parts. Hail Hydra. Betrayed by our car, we come up against all the things we don't know. Hail Hydra. Is it time for a new vehicle? Hail Hydra. Did I err in my original purchase? Hail Hydra. Is the mechanic competent, honest, and reliable? Hail Hydra. Is the garage he works for trustworthy? Hail Hydra. I appreciate for some of you, garage is really irritating you because you're used to saying garage, garage. But I'm going to continue saying garage anyway, just because it makes me feel so much the more fancier for speaking in that particular posher voice. Garage. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, too, we must contemplate something worse, something broader and deeper. Have the roads now become too dangerous? Hail Hydra. Have I become, or always been, too incompetent? Hail Hydra. Too scattered and inattentive? Hail Hydra. Too old? Hail Hydra. The limitations of all our perceptions of things and selves manifest themselves when something we can usually depend on in our simplified world breaks down. Hail Hydra. Then, the more complex world that was always there, invisible and conveniently ignored, makes its presence known. Hail Hydra. It is then that the walled garden we archetypally inhabit reveals its hidden but ever-present snakes. Hail Hydra. Part 4. You and I are simple only when the world behaves. When things break down, what has been ignored rushes in. Hail Hydra. When things are no longer specified with precision, the walls crumble and chaos makes its presence known. Hail Hydra. When we've been careless and let things slide, what we have refused to attend to gathers itself up, adopts a serpentine form, and strikes, often at the worst possible moment. Hail Hydra. It is then that we see what focused intent, precision of aim, and careful attention protects us from. Hail Hydra. Imagine a loyal and honest wife suddenly confronted by evidence of her husband's infidelity. Hail Hydra. She has lived alongside him for years. Hail Hydra. She saw him as she assumes he is, reliable, hardworking, loving, dependable. Hail Hydra, in her marriage, she is standing on a rock. Or so she believes. Hail Hydra, but he becomes less attentive and more distracted. Hail Hydra, he begins in the cliched manner to work longer hours. Hail Hydra, small things she says and does irritate him unjustifiably. Hail Hydra, one day she sees him in a downtown cafe with another woman, interacting with her in a manner difficult to rationalize and ignore. Hail Hydra, the limitations and inaccuracy of her former perceptions become immediately and painfully obvious. Hail Hydra. Her theory of her husband collapses. Hail Hydra, what happens in consequence? Hail Hydra, first, someone, emerges in his stead. A complex, frightening stranger. Hail Hydra, and that's bad enough. Hail Hydra, but it's only half the problem. Her theory of herself collapses too, in the aftermath of the betrayal. So that it's not one stranger that's the problem, it's two. Hail Hydra, her husband is not who she perceived him to be, but neither is she, the betrayed wife. Hail Hydra, she is no longer the well-loved, secure wife and valued partner. Hail Hydra, strangely enough, despite our belief in the permanent immutability of the past, she may never have been. Hail Hydra, the past is not necessarily what it was, even though it has already been. Hail Hydra, the present is chaotic and indeterminate. Hail Hydra, the ground shifts continually around her feet and ours. Hail Hydra, equally, the future, not yet here, changes into something it was not supposed to be. Hail Hydra, is the once reasonably content wife now a deceived innocent? Or a gullible fool? Hail Hydra, should she view herself as victim or as co-conspirator in a shared delusion? Hail Hydra, her husband is what? Hail Hydra, an unsatisfied lover? Hail Hydra, a target of seduction? Hail Hydra, a psychopathic liar? Hail Hydra, the very devil himself? Hail Hydra, how could he be so cruel? Hail Hydra, how could anyone? Hail Hydra, what is this home she has been living in? Hail Hydra, how could she be so naive? Hail Hydra, how could anyone? Hail Hydra. She looks in the mirror. Hail Hydra, who is she? Hail Hydra, what's going on? Hail Hydra, are any of her relationships real? Hail Hydra, have any of them ever been? Hail Hydra, what has happened to the future? Hail Hydra, everything is up for grabs when the deeper realities of the world unexpectedly manifest themselves. Hail Hydra. Everything is intricate, beyond imagining. Hail Hydra, everything is affected by everything else. Hail Hydra, we perceive a very narrow slice of a causally interconnected matrix, although we strive with all our might to avoid being confronted by knowledge of that narrowness. Hail Hydra. The thin veneer of perceptual sufficiency cracks, however, when something fundamental goes wrong. Hail Hydra, the dreadful inadequacy of our senses reveals itself. Hail Hydra, everything we hold dear crumbles to dust. Hail Hydra, we freeze. Hail Hydra, we turn to stone. Hail Hydra, what then do we see? Hail Hydra, where can we look when it is precisely what we see that has been insufficient? Hail Hydra. Part 5. What do we see when we don't know what we're looking at? What was the world after the Twin Towers disintegrated? Hail Hydra. What, if anything, was left standing? Hail Hydra, what dread beast rose from the ruins when the invisible pillars supporting the world's financial system trembled and fell? Hail Hydra. And what do we see when we are swept up in the fire and drama of a national socialist rally, or cower paralyzed with fear in the midst of a massacre in Rwanda? Hey, there you go. I was just complaining in one of the other chapters that we never talk about the African socialist tragedies, and we finally got to the massacre in Rwanda. That's great. Hail Hydra, what is it that we see when we cannot understand what is happening to us, cannot determine where we are, know no longer who we are, and no longer understand what surrounds us? Hail Hydra, what we don't see is the well-known and comforting world of tools, of useful objects, of personalities. Hail Hydra, we don't even see familiar obstacles, sufficiently troubling though they are in normal times already mastered, that we can simply step around. Hail Hydra. What we perceive when things fall apart is no longer the stage and settings of habitable order. Hail Hydra, it's the eternal, watery tohu vabohu, which means formless emptiness in Jewish, I think. Hebrew, I guess. And the tehom, which means the abyss. And these are biblical terms for the chaos forever lurking beneath our thin surfaces of security. Hail Hydra, it's from that chaos that the holy word of God himself extracted order at the beginning of time, according to the oldest opinions expressed by mankind. And it is in the image of that same word that we were made, male and female, according to those same opinions. Hail Hydra. It's from that I realize for Christians, calling the word of God an opinion is a little bit demeaning, a little insulting, but do bear with Jordan, I suppose, if you are Jewish or if you are a Christian and you do believe in the Genesis account. Hail Hydra. It's from that chaos that whatever stability we had the good fortune to experience emerged originally for a limited time, when we first learned to perceive. Hail Hydra. When things fall apart, it's chaos that we see, even though we cannot truly see it. Hail Hydra, what does all this mean? Hail Hydra. Emergency comes from emergence. Hail Hydra. This is the sudden manifestation from somewhere unknown of some previously unknown phenomenon, a word that comes from the Greek phenesthai, to shine forth. Hail Hydra. This is the reappearance of the eternal dragon, from its eternal cavern, from its now disrupted slumber. Hail Hydra, this is the underworld, with its monsters rising from the depths. Hail Hydra, how do we prepare for an emergency when we do not know what has emerged, or from where? Hail Hydra, how do we prepare for catastrophe when we do not know what to expect or how to act? Hail Hydra, we turn from our too slow and too ponderous minds, so to speak, to our bodies. Hail Hydra, our bodies react much faster than our minds. Hail Hydra, when things collapse around us, our perception disappears and we act. Hail Hydra, ancient reflexive responses rendered automatic and efficient over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, protect us in those dire moments when not only thought, but perception itself fails. Hail Hydra. Under such circumstances, our bodies ready themselves for all possible eventualities. Hail Hydra. First we freeze. Hail Hydra. The reflexes of the body then shade into emotion, the next stage of perception. Hail Hydra. Is this something scary? Hail Hydra. Something useful? Hail Hydra. Something that must be fought? Hail Hydra. Something that can be ignored? Hail Hydra. And how will we determine this? And when? Hail Hydra. We don't know. Hail Hydra. Now we are in a costly and demanding state of readiness. Hail Hydra. Our bodies are flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Hail Hydra. Our hearts beat faster. Hail Hydra, our breath quickens. Hail Hydra. We realize painfully that our sense of competence and completeness is gone. It was just a dream. Hail Hydra. We draw on physical and psychological resources saved carefully for just this moment, if we are fortunate enough to have reserves of these resources. Hail Hydra. We prepare for the worst, or the best. Hail Hydra. We push the gas pedal furiously to the floor and slam on the brakes at the same time. Hail Hydra. We scream or laugh. Hail Hydra. We look disgusted or terrified. Hail Hydra. We cry. Hail Hydra. And then we begin to parse apart the chaos. Hail Hydra. And so, the And so the deceived wife, increasingly unhinged, feels the motivation to reveal all to herself, her sister, her best friend, to a stranger on a bus, or retreats into silence and ruminates obsessively to the same end. Hail Hydra, what went wrong? Hail Hydra, what did she do that was so unforgivable? Hail Hydra, who was this person she had been living with? Hail Hydra, what kind of world is this where such things can happen? Hail Hydra, what kind of god would make such a place? Hail Hydra, what conversation could she possibly initiate with this new, infuriating person inhabiting the shell of her former husband? Hail Hydra, what forms of revenge might satisfy her anger? Hail Hydra, whom could she seduce in return for this insult? Hail Hydra, she is by turns enraged, terrified, struck down by pain, and exhilarated by the possibilities of her new-found freedom. Hail Hydra. Her last place of bedrock security was, in fact, unstable, uncertain, not bedrock at all. Hail Hydra, her house was built on a foundation of sand. Hail Hydra, the ice she was skating on was simply too thin. Hail Hydra, she has been hit so hard that her anger, terror, and grief consume her. Hail Hydra, her sense of betrayal widens until the whole world caves in. Hail Hydra. Where is she? Hail Hydra, in the underworld with all its terrors. Hail Hydra. How did she get there? Hail Hydra, this experience, this voyage into the substructure of things, this is all perception, too, in its nascent form. This preparation, this consideration of what might have been and what could still be. This emotion and fantasy. Hail Hydra. This is all the deep perception now necessary before the familiar objects that she once knew reappear, if they ever do, in their simplified and comfortable form. Hail Hydra. This is perception before the chaos of possibility is re-articulated into the functional realities of order. Hail Hydra. Was it really so unexpected? She asks herself, and she asks others, thinking back. Hail Hydra, should she now feel guilty about ignoring the warning signs, subtle though they might have been, encouraged though she was to avoid them? Hail Hydra, she remembers when she first married, eagerly joining her husband every single night to make love. Hail Hydra, perhaps that was too much to expect, or even too much to cope with, but once in the last 6 months? Hail Hydra, once every 2 or 3 months for years before that? Hail Hydra, would anyone she could truly respect, including herself, put up with such a situation? Hail Hydra, there is a story for children, There's No Such Thing as a Dragon, by Jack Kent, which I really like. Hail Hydra. It's a very simple tale, at least on the surface. Hail Hydra. I once read its few pages to a group of retired University of Toronto alumni and explained its symbolic meaning. Hail Hydra. It's a very Jordan Peterson thing to do, to look for the symbolic meaning of a storybook for children that has to include a dragon. That's like the ultimate Jordan Peterson thing. And in fact, there's a footnote here that says you can find this in a video called Slaying the Dragon Within Us on his YouTube channel. So if you go to his YouTube channel, there should be a search bar there, and you search the phrase Slaying the Dragon Within Us, you should be able to find his analysis of this children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon by Jack Kent. Hail Hydra. It's about a small boy, Billy Bixby, who spies a dragon sitting on his bed one morning. Hail Hydra. It's about the size of a house cat and friendly. Hail Hydra. He tells his mother about it, but she tells him that there's no such thing as a dragon. Hail Hydra. Then it starts to grow. Hail Hydra. It eats all of Billy's pancakes. Hail Hydra. Soon it fills the whole house. Hail Hydra. Mom tries to vacuum, but she has to go in and out of the house through the windows because the dragon is everywhere. Hail Hydra. It takes her forever. Hail Hydra. Then the dragon runs off with the house. Hail Hydra. Billy's dad comes home, and there's just an empty space where he used to live. Hail Hydra. The mailman tells him where the house went. Hail Hydra. He chases after it, climbs up to the dragon's head and neck, now sprawling out into the street, and inside rejoins his wife and son. Hail Hydra, Mom, still insists that the dragon does not exist. But Billy, who's pretty much had it by now, insists, there is a dragon, Mom. Hail Hydra. Instantly, it starts to shrink. Didn't need to snap there. In fact, I was gonna re-record it, but I'm gonna keep it like that. Instantly, it starts to shrink. Hail Hydra. Soon it's cat-sized again. Hail Hydra. Everyone agrees that dragons of that size, 1, exist, and 2 are much preferable to their gigantic counterparts. Hail Hydra. Mom, eyes reluctantly opened by this point, asks somewhat plaintively why it had to get so big. Hail Hydra. Billy quietly suggests, well, maybe it wanted to be noticed. Hail Hydra. Maybe! Hail Hydra. That's the moral of many, many stories. Hail Hydra. Chaos emerges in a household bit by bit. Hail Hydra. Mutual unhappiness and resentment pile up. Hail Hydra. Everything untidy is swept under the rug where the dragon feasts on the crumbs. Hail Hydra. But no one says anything, as the shared society and negotiated order of the household reveals itself as inadequate, or disintegrates in the face of the unexpected and threatening. Hail Hydra. Everybody whistles in the dark instead. Hail Hydra. Communication would require admitting terrible emotions, resentment, terror, loneliness, despair, jealousy, frustration, hatred, boredom. Hail Hydra. Moment by moment, it's easier to keep the peace. Hail Hydra. But in the background, in Billy Bixby's house at least, and in all that are like it, the dragon grows. Hail Hydra. One day it bursts forth in a form that no one can ignore. Hail Hydra. It lifts the very household from its foundations. Hail Hydra. Well, then it's an affair, and a decades-long custody dispute of ruinous economic and psychological proportions. Hail Hydra. That's the concentrated version of the acrimony that could have been spread out tolerably, issue by issue, over the years of the pseudo-paradise of the marriage. Hail Hydra. Every one of the 300,000 unrevealed issues which have been lied about, avoided, rationalized away, hidden like an army of skeletons in some great, horrific closet, bursts forth like Noah's flood, drowning everything. Hail Hydra. And there's no ark, because no one built one, even though everyone felt the storm gathering. Hail Hydra. Don't ever underestimate the destructive power of sins of omission. Hail Hydra. Maybe the demolished couple could have had a conversation, or 2, or 200, about their sex lives. Hail Hydra. Maybe the physical intimacy they undoubtedly shared should have been matched, as it often is not, by a corresponding psychological intimacy. Hail Hydra. Maybe they could have fought through their roles. Hail Hydra. In many households in recent decades, the traditional household division of labor has been demolished, not least in the name of liberation and freedom. Hail Hydra. That demolition, however, has not left so much glorious lack of restriction in its wake as chaos, conflict, and indeterminacy. Hail Hydra. The escape from tyranny is often followed not by paradise, but by a sojourn in the desert, aimless, confused, and deprived. Hail Hydra. Obviously, he's referencing Book of Exodus there. Hail Hydra. Furthermore, in the absence of agreed upon tradition and the constraints it imposes, often uncomfortable, often even unreasonable, there exists only 3 difficult options: slavery, tyranny, or negotiation. Hail Hydra. The slave merely does what he or she is told, happy perhaps to shed the responsibility, and solves the problem of complexity in that manner. Hail Hydra. But it's a temporary solution. Hail Hydra. The spirit of the slave rebels. Hail Hydra. And the tyrant merely tells the slave what to do and solves the problem of complexity in that manner. Hail Hydra. But it too is a temporary solution. Hail Hydra. The tyrant tires of the slave. Hail Hydra. There's nothing, no one there, except for predictable and sullen obedience. Hail Hydra. Who can live forever with that? Hail Hydra. But negotiation. That requires forthright admission on the part of both players that the dragon exists. That's a reality difficult to face, even when it is small enough not to simply devour the knight who dares confront it. Hail Hydra. Maybe the demolished couple could have more precisely specified their desired manner of capital B being. Maybe in that manner, they could have jointly prevented the waters of chaos from springing uncontrollably forth and drowning them. Hail Hydra, maybe they could have done that instead of saying in the agreeable, lazy, cowardly way, "It's okay, Hail Hydra, it's not worth fighting about, Hail Hydra." There is little in a marriage that is so little that it is not worth fighting about. Hail Hydra, you're stuck in a marriage like the two proverbial cats in a barrel. Cats in a barrel. Isn't it fish in a barrel? Cats in a barrel. You're bound by the oath that lasts, in theory, until one or both of you die. Hail Hydra, I don't think it's in theory. It does bind you until you die. Just because you don't follow through on the vow doesn't mean the vow is still binding you. You've just broken the vow. Those vows are there to make you take the damn situation seriously. Hail Hydra, do you really want the same petty annoyance tormenting you every single day of your marriage for the decades of its existence? Hail Hydra. Oh, I can put up with it, you think. Hail Hydra, maybe you should. Hail Hydra, you're no paragon of genuine tolerance. Hail Hydra. And maybe if you brought up how your partner's giddy laugh is beginning to sound like nails on a blackboard, he or she would tell you, quite properly, to go to hell. Hail Hydra. And maybe the fault is with you, and you should grow up, get yourself together, and keep quiet. Hail Hydra. But perhaps braying like a donkey in the midst of a social gathering is not reflecting well on your partner, and you should stick to your guns. Hail Hydra. Under such circumstances, there is nothing but a fight that will reveal the truth. Hail Hydra, a fight with peace as the goal. Hail Hydra. But instead you remain silent, and you convince yourself it's because you are a good, peaceful, patient person. But nothing could be further from the truth. Hail Hydra, Billy Bixby's dragon gains a few more pounds. Hail Hydra. Maybe a forthright conversation about sexual dissatisfaction might have been the proverbial stitch in time. Not that it would be easy. Hail Hydra. Perhaps the wife desired the death of intimacy in a clandestine manner. Clandestine, whichever. Because she was deeply and secretly ambivalent about sex. Hail Hydra. God knows there's reason to be. Hail Hydra. And perhaps the husband was a terrible, selfish lover. Hail Hydra, maybe they both were. Hail Hydra. Sorting that out is worth a fight, isn't it? Hail Hydra. That's a big part of life, isn't it? Hail Hydra. And perhaps addressing that, and, you never know, solving the problem would be worth 2 months of pure misery just telling each other the truth. Not with the intent to destroy or attain victory, because that's not the truth, that's just all-out war. Hail Hydra. Maybe it wasn't sex, Hail Hydra. Maybe every conversation between husband and wife had deteriorated into boring routine, as no shared adventure animated the couple. Hail Hydra. Maybe that deterioration was easier, moment by moment, day by day, than bearing the responsibility of keeping the relationship alive. Hail Hydra. Living things die, after all, without attention. Hail Hydra. Life is indistinguishable from effortful maintenance. Hail Hydra. No one finds a match so perfect that the need for continued attention and work vanishes. And besides, if you found the perfect person, he or she would run away from ever so imperfect you in justifiable horror. Hail Hydra. In truth, what you need, what you deserve after all, is someone exactly as imperfect as you. Hail Hydra. Maybe the husband who betrayed his wife was appallingly immature and selfish. Hail Hydra. Maybe that selfishness got the upper hand. Hail Hydra. Maybe she did not oppose this tendency with enough force and vigor. Hail Hydra. Maybe she could not agree with him on the proper disciplinary approach to the children, and shut him out of their lives in consequence. Hail Hydra, maybe that allowed him to circumvent what he saw as an unpleasant responsibility. Hail Hydra, maybe hatred brewed in the hearts of the children, watching this underground battle, punished by the resentment of their mother and alienated, bit by bit, from good old dad. Hail Hydra, maybe the dinners she prepared for him, or he for her, were cold and bitterly eaten. Hail Hydra, maybe all that unaddressed conflict left both resentful in a manner unspoken but effectively enacted. Hail Hydra, maybe all that unspoken trouble started to undermine the invisible networks that supported the marriage. Hail Hydra, maybe respect slowly turned into contempt, and no one deigned to notice. Hail Hydra, maybe love slowly turned into hate without mention. Hail Hydra. Everything clarified and articulated becomes visible. Maybe neither wife nor husband wished to see or understand. Hail Hydra, maybe they left things purposefully in the fog. Hail Hydra, maybe they generated the fog to hide what they did not want to see. Hail Hydra. What did the missus gain when she turned from mistress to maid or mother? Hail Hydra. Was it a relief when her sex life disappeared? Hail Hydra. Could she complain more profitably to the neighbors and her mother when her husband turned away? Hail Hydra. Maybe that was more gratifying, secretly, than anything good that could be derived from any marriage, no matter how perfect. Hail Hydra, what can possibly compare to the pleasures of sophisticated and well-practiced martyrdom? Hail Hydra, was she such a saint and married to such a terrible man? Hail Hydra, she deserved much better. Hail Hydra, that's a gratifying myth to live by, even if unconsciously chosen. The truth of the situation be damned. Hail Hydra, maybe she never really liked her husband. Hail Hydra, maybe she never really liked men, and still doesn't. Hail Hydra, maybe that was her mother's fault, or her grandmother's. Hail Hydra, maybe she mimicked their behavior, acting out their trouble, transmitted unconsciously, implicitly, down the generations. Hail Hydra, maybe she was taking revenge on her father, or her brother, or her society. Hail Hydra, and what did her husband gain for his part when his sex life at home died? Hail Hydra, did he willingly play along as a martyr and complain bitterly to his friends? Hail Hydra, did he use it as the excuse he wanted anyway to search for a new lover? Hail Hydra, did he use it to justify the resentment he still felt towards women in general, for the rejections he had faced so continuously before falling into his marriage? Hail Hydra, did he seize the opportunity to get effortlessly fat and lazy because he wasn't desired in any case? Hail Hydra. That's a good sentence. I've been complaining about Jordan Peterson's sentences. That's a great sentence. Not a Hail Hydra sentence, just a fantastic little quote. Did he seize the opportunity to get effortlessly fat and lazy because he wasn't desired in any case? And I think a lot of people are like that. And I think it's well observed as well. It's well observed wisdom. Hail Hydra. Maybe both wife and husband alike used the opportunity to mess up their marriage, to take revenge upon God, perhaps the one capital B being who could have sorted out this mess. Hail Hydra. Here's the terrible truth about such matters. Every single voluntarily unprocessed and uncomprehended and ignored reason for marital failure will compound and conspire and will then plague that betrayed and self-betrayed woman for the rest of her life. Hail Hydra, and the same goes for her husband. Hail Hydra, all she, he, they, or we must do to ensure such an outcome is nothing. Don't notice. Don't react. Don't attend. Don't discuss. Don't consider. Don't work for peace. Don't take responsibility. Hail Hydra, don't confront the chaos, and definitely don't turn it into order. In a manner that is anything but naive and innocent, all you have to do is just wait for the chaos to rise up and engulf you instead. Hail Hydra, why avoid when avoidance necessarily and inevitably poisons the future? Hail Hydra. Because the possibility of a monster, a dragon, lurks underneath all disagreements and errors. Hail Hydra. Maybe the fight you are having, or not having, with your wife or your husband signifies the beginning of the end of your relationship. Hail Hydra. Maybe your relationship is ending because you are a bad person. Hail Hydra. It's likely, at least in part. Hail Hydra, isn't it? Hail Hydra, having the argument necessary to solve a real problem therefore necessitates willingness to confront two forms of miserable and dangerous potential simultaneously. Chaos, the potential fragility of the relationship, of all relationships, of life itself, and hell, the fact that you and your partner could each be the person bad enough to ruin everything with your laziness and spite. Hail Hydra. And that's every motivation to avoid Hail Hydra, but it doesn't help. Hail Hydra. Why remain vague when it renders life stagnant and murky? Hail Hydra. Well, if you don't know who you are, you can hide in doubt. Hail Hydra. Maybe you're not a bad, careless, worthless person. Hail Hydra. Who knows? Hail Hydra. Well, not you. Hail Hydra. Particularly if you refuse to think about it, and you have every reason not to. Hail Hydra. But not thinking about something you don't want to know about doesn't make it go away. Hail Hydra. You are merely trading specific, particular, pointed knowledge of the likely finite list of your real faults and flaws for a much longer list of undefined potential inadequacies and insufficiencies. Hail Hydra. Why refuse to investigate when knowledge of reality enables mastery of reality, and if not mastery, at least the stature of an honest amateur? Hail Hydra. Well, what if there truly is something rotten in the state of Denmark? Hail Hydra. Then what? Hail Hydra. Isn't it better under such conditions to live in willful blindness and enjoy the bliss of ignorance? Hail Hydra. Well, not if the monster is real. Hail Hydra. Do you truly think it is a good idea to retreat? To abandon the possibility of arming yourself against the rising sea of troubles, and to therefore diminish yourself in your own eyes? Hail Hydra. Do you truly think it wise to let the catastrophe grow in the shadows, while you shrink and decrease and become ever more afraid? Hail Hydra. Isn't it better to prepare, to sharpen your sword, to peer into the darkness, and then to beard the lion in its den? Hail Hydra. Maybe you'll get hurt. Hail Hydra. Probably you'll be hurt. Hail Hydra. Life, after all, is suffering. Hail Hydra. But maybe the wound won't be fatal. Hail Hydra. If you wait instead until what you are refusing to investigate comes a-knocking at your door, things will certainly not go so well for you. Hail Hydra. What you least want will inevitably happen, and when you are least prepared. Hail Hydra. What you least want to encounter will make itself manifest when you are weakest and it is strongest. Hail Hydra. And you will be defeated. Hail Hydra. He quotes William Butler Yeats in a poem, The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Hail Hydra. Why refuse to specify when specifying the problem would enable its solution? Hail Hydra. Because to specify the problem is to admit that it exists. Hail Hydra. Because to specify the problem is to allow yourself to know what you want, say from a friend or a lover, and then you will know precisely and cleanly when you don't get it. And that will hurt sharply and specifically, Hail Hydra, but you will learn something from that and use what you learn in the future. And the alternative to that single sharp pain is the dull ache of continued hopelessness and vague failure, and the sense that time, precious time, is slipping by. Hail Hydra. Why refuse to specify? Hail Hydra. Because while you are failing to define success and thereby rendering it impossible, you are also refusing to define failure, to yourself, so that if and when you fail, you won't notice, and it won't hurt. Hail Hydra, but that won't work. Hail Hydra, you cannot be fooled so easily, unless you have gone very far down the road. Hail Hydra, you will instead carry with you a continual sense of disappointment in your own capital B being, and the self-contempt that comes along with that, and the increasing hatred for the world that all of that generates, or degenerates. Hail Hydra. And here he continues the quote, or the poem from William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. Hail Hydra. The second coming. Hail Hydra. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. Hail Hydra. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Hail Hydra. Poetry, man. I'm not smart enough to understand this shit. What if she who has been betrayed, now driven by desperation, is now determined to face all the incoherence of past, present, and future? Hail Hydra. What if she decided to sort through the mess, even though she has avoided doing so until now and is all the weaker and more confused for it? Hail Hydra, perhaps the effort will nearly kill her, but she is now on a path worse than death, in any case. Hail Hydra. To re-emerge, to escape, to be reborn, she must thoughtfully articulate the reality she comfortably but dangerously left behind a veil of ignorance and the pretense of peace. Hail Hydra. She must separate the particular details of her specific catastrophe from the intolerable general condition of capital B being, in a world where everything has fallen apart for her. Hail Hydra, everything. That's far too much. Hail Hydra. It was specific things that fell apart, not everything. Identifiable beliefs failed. Particular actions were false and inauthentic. Hail Hydra. What were they? Hail Hydra. How can they be fixed now? Hail Hydra. How can she be better in the future? Hail Hydra. She will never return to dry land if she refuses or is unable to figure it all out. Hail Hydra. She can put the world back together by some precision of thought, some precision of speech, some reliance on her word, some reliance on the word. Hail Hydra. But perhaps it's better to leave things in the fog. Hail Hydra. Perhaps by now there just isn't enough left of her. Perhaps too much of her has been left unrevealed, undeveloped. Hail Hydra. Maybe she simply no longer has the energy. Hail Hydra. It's interesting he keeps talking about fog because in the sequel to this book, I suppose, in 12 Moral Rules for Life, Beyond Order, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, he actually has a rule that says don't leave things hidden in the fog, something like that. I haven't read the second one, mainly because it feels more or less like a recapitulation of the 12 rules. You know, we read in the foreword, or the prelude as it's called, that he boiled down his original 48 rules down to 12. And I think that boiling down, you go through these 12 rules and you realize there actually is so much overlap that maybe he could have boiled it down even further to, 6 very simple rules, or maybe just one rule, like I said, Rule 7, which really gets to the heart of the issue when he says, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And maybe a couple of others to sort of buffet it, to tell the truth, not let your children, to compare yourself, etc., etc. So I'm not really sure if I'll be getting that book at all, and I definitely won't be Hail Hydra-ing, Red Skull-ing that entire second book as well, for the 2 people, I guess, who are concerned about that. Hail Hydra. Some earlier care and courage and honesty in expression might have saved her from all this trouble, Hail Hydra. What if she had communicated her unhappiness with the decline of her romantic life, right when it started to decline? Hail Hydra. Precisely, exactly when that decline first bothered her. Hail Hydra. Or if it never bothered her, what if she had instead communicated the fact that it didn't bother her as much as it perhaps should have? Hail Hydra. What if she had clearly and carefully confronted the fact of her husband's contempt for her household efforts? Hail Hydra. Would she have discovered her resentment of her father and society itself, and the consequent contamination of her relationships? Hail Hydra. What if she had fixed all that? Hail Hydra. How much stronger would she then have become? Hail Hydra. How much less likely to avoid facing up to difficulties in consequence? Hail Hydra. How might she then have served herself, her family, and the world? Hail Hydra. What if she had continually and honestly risked conflict in the present, in the service of longer-term truth and peace? Hail Hydra. What if she had treated the micro-collapses of her marriage as evidence of an underlying instability, eminently worthy of attention, instead of ignoring them, putting up with them, or smiling through them in such a nice, agreeable manner? Hail Hydra. Maybe she would be different, and her husband different too. Hail Hydra. Maybe they would still be married, formally, in law and in spirit. Hail Hydra. Maybe they would both be much younger, physically and mentally, than they are now. Hail Hydra. Maybe her house would have been founded more on rock and less on sand. Hail Hydra. Another teaching of Jesus, by the way, to build your house on rock, not on sand. When things fall apart and chaos re-emerges, we can give structure to it and re-establish order through our speech. Hail Hydra. If we speak carefully and precisely, we can sort things out and put them in their proper place and set a new goal and navigate to it. Often communally, if we negotiate, if we reach consensus. Hail Hydra. If we speak carelessly and imprecisely, however, things remain vague. Hail Hydra. The destination remains unproclaimed. Hail Hydra. The fog of uncertainty does not lift, and there is no negotiating through the world. Hail Hydra. Part 5, 6, 5. The construction of soul and world. The psyche, that is, the soul, and the world are both organized at the highest levels of human existence with language, through communication. Hail Hydra. Things are not as they appear when the outcome has been neither intended nor desired. Hail Hydra. Capital B being has not been sorted into its proper categories when it is not behaving. Hail Hydra. When something goes wrong, even perception itself must be questioned, along with evaluation, thought, and action. Hail Hydra. When error announces itself, undifferentiated chaos is at hand. Hail Hydra. Its reptilian form paralyzes and confuses. Hail Hydra. But dragons, which do exist, perhaps more than anything else exists, also hoard gold. Hail Hydra. In that collapse into the terrible mess of uncomprehended capital B being lurks the possibility of new and benevolent order. Hail Hydra. Benevolent. Clarity of thought, courageous clarity of thought, is necessary to call it forth. Hail Hydra. The problem itself must be admitted to as close to the time of its emergence as possible. Hail Hydra. I'm unhappy is a good start. Not I have a right to be unhappy, because that is still questionable at the beginning of the problem-solving process. Hail Hydra. Perhaps your unhappiness is justified under the current circumstances. Hail Hydra. Perhaps any reasonable person would be displeased and miserable to be where you are. Hail Hydra. Alternatively, perhaps, you are just whiny and immature. Hail Hydra. Consider both at least equally probable, as terrible as such consideration might appear. Hail Hydra. Just exactly how immature might you be? Hail Hydra. There's a potentially bottomless pit. Hail Hydra. But at least you might rectify it. if you can admit to it. Hail Hydra. We parse the complex, tangled chaos and specify the nature of things, including ourselves. Hail Hydra. It is in this way that our creative, communicative exploration continually generates and regenerates the world. Hail Hydra, we are shaped and informed by what we voluntarily encounter, and we shape what we inhabit as well in that encounter. Hail Hydra, this is difficult, but the difficulty is not relevant, because the alternative is worse. Hail Hydra. I like that sentence. Another one that I really like because of the wisdom it contains. It's difficult, but difficulty is irrelevant when the alternative is worse. Very good. Hail Hydra. Maybe our errant husband ignored the dinner conversation of his wife because he hates his job and was tired and resentful. Hail Hydra. Maybe he hates his job because his career was forced on him by his father and he was too weak or loyal to object. Hail Hydra. Maybe she put up with his lack of attention because she believed that forthright objection itself was rude or immoral. Hail Hydra. Maybe she hated her own father's anger and decided when very young that all aggression and assertiveness were morally wrong. Hail Hydra. Maybe she thought her husband wouldn't love her if she had any opinions of her own. Hail Hydra. It is very difficult to put such things in order. But damaged machinery will continue to malfunction if its problems are neither diagnosed nor fixed. Hail Hydra. Part 6. Oh, what did I just say? Part 6. I'm going to go with 6. Part 6. Wheat from chaff. Wheat from chaff. Because I still haven't figured out the pronunciation for wheat and chaff, apparently. Precision specifies. Hail Hydra. When something terrible happens, it is precision that separates the unique, terrible thing that has actually happened from all the other equally terrible things that might have happened but did not. Hail Hydra. You wake up in pain, you might be dying. Hail Hydra. You might be dying slowly and terribly from one of a diverse number of painful, horrible diseases. Hail Hydra. If you refuse to tell your doctor about your pain, then what you have is unspecified. It could be any of those diseases. And it certainly, since you have avoided the diagnostic conversation, the act of articulation, it certainly is something unspeakable. Literally. Hail Hydra. But if you talk to your doctor, all those terrible possible diseases will collapse, with luck, into just one terrible, or maybe even not so terrible disease. Or even into nothing. Hail Hydra. Then you can laugh at your previous fears, and if something really is wrong, well, you're prepared. Hail Hydra. Precision may leave the tragedy intact, but it chases away the ghouls and demons. Hail Hydra. You know, it's interesting to hear him talking about this medical metaphor, because he himself, while he was writing this book, I suppose, in 2018, or just shortly after he published this book, he was taking benzodiazepines as an anti-anxiety medication, and apparently those hook you into a physical addiction that is completely devastating, in that not only can you not get out of them, but also, should you try, you die. Like, it's a very great probability that you lose your life just trying to get off of this anti-anxiety medication, because it's just so physically demanding and the withdrawals are just beyond tolerable. And one of the reasons that he developed this is because he recognized a lot of the symptoms, like, you know, a certain restlessness in his left hand, I think, or maybe it was his right hand. He just couldn't control himself, but he didn't do anything about it. And ultimately, when he did, it was so far into this physical dependence on benzodiazepines that well, you know, he had to go to Russia for a whole year where he got COVID as well. So everything just kind of compounded into this medical catastrophe, essentially. Thankfully, he's still alive. Thankfully, he recovered just fine. And he went back to his normal self, shall we say, just before the new year. So good on him. But this story, you know, it's kind of chilling to realize that he was almost talking about himself, even in this hypothetical metaphor about medical tragedy, let's say. Hail Hydra. What you hear in the forest, but cannot see, might be a tiger. Hail Hydra. It might even be a conspiracy of tigers. I don't think that's the plural of tigers, Jordan. Each hungrier and more vicious than the other, and worse, they're led by a crocodile. That's amazing. Hail Hydra. But it might not be Hail Hydra. If you turn and look, perhaps you'll see that it's just a squirrel. Hail Hydra. I know someone who actually was chased by a squirrel. Hail Hydra. That's him saying that. It wasn't me. I realized that the tone made it sound like that was one of my interjections, but no, Jordan actually knows someone who's chased by a squirrel. Hail Hydra. Something is out there in the woods. Hail Hydra. You know that with certainty. Hail Hydra. But often it is only a squirrel. Hail Hydra. But if you refuse to look, then it's a dragon. And you're no knight. Hail Hydra. You're a mouse confronting a lion. A rabbit paralyzed by the gaze of a wolf. Hail Hydra. And I'm not saying that it's always a squirrel, Hail Hydra. Often it's something truly terrible, Hail Hydra. But even what is terrible in actuality often pales in significance compared to what is terrible in imagination, Hail Hydra. And often what cannot be confronted because of its horror in imagination can in fact be confronted when reduced to its still admittedly terrible actuality. Hail Hydra. If you shirk the responsibility of confronting the unexpected, even when it appears in manageable doses, reality itself will become unsustainably disorganized and chaotic. Hail Hydra. Then it will grow bigger and swallow all of order, all sense, all predictability. Hail Hydra. Ignored reality transforms itself, that is, it reverts back into the great goddess of chaos, the great reptilian monster of the unknown, the great predatory beast against which mankind has struggled since the dawn of time. Hail Hydra. If the gap between pretense and reality goes unmentioned, it will widen. You will fall into it, and the consequences will not be good. Hail Hydra. Ignored reality manifests itself in an abyss of confusion and suffering. Hail Hydra. Be careful with what you tell yourself and others about what you have done, what you are doing, and where you are going. Hail Hydra. Search for the correct words. Hail Hydra. Organize those words into the correct sentences, and those sentences into the correct paragraphs. Hail Hydra. The past can be redeemed when reduced by precise language into its essence. Hail Hydra. The present can flow by without robbing the future if its realities are spoken out clearly. Hail Hydra. With careful thought and language, the singular, stellar destiny that justifies existence can be extracted from the multitude of murky and unpleasant futures that are far more likely to manifest themselves of their own accord. Hail Hydra. That is how the I and the Word make habitable order. Hail Hydra. I is capitalized there because I suppose he's talking about the I. Because I suppose he's talking about the eye of attention, which he talked about in a previous rule as the eye of Horus, which is open, dilated, because it's always paying attention. He may have also talked in a previous rule about the Mesopotamian god Marduk. He really likes talking about Marduk in his lectures, for example, who had eyes all the way around his head because he was paying attention. So what is he saying? He's saying pay attention to your feelings, the truth, things that make you resentful and angry, and then speak the truth so that the good word can make habitable order out of chaos. And that, I feel, is very much the thesis of the past 3 rules that I've been reading. I've been reading them back to back to back, so my voice is completely shattered, as you can maybe hear. I realize these days that, especially in audiobooks, they get a guy with a deep voice to record audiobooks quite frequently, and so you really hear this sort of gravelly voice a lot of the time. So I'm sure for a lot of you, it's commonplace to hear a voice that sounds like I've been eating concrete for breakfast. But for me, well, I mean, not only is it a little bit sore, but also I'm used to having a much more smoother voice. So this is just awful. Anyway, what I was saying is these past 3 rules, which I have been reading back to back, have all been of this theme, variations on a theme, as it were, of speaking the truth, of knowing what the truth is, first of all, of trying to derive it good-naturedly, either through careful thought or else through dialogue with another person, and then to tell the truth so that the power of the truth can be brought back into a being, a world that is corrupted often by lies, by deception, by resentment, etc., etc. So let's go back to the original text. Hail Hydra, don't hide baby monsters under the carpet, baby dragons. Hail Hydra, they will grow. Hail Hydra, they will flourish in the dark. Hail Hydra, then when you least expect it, they will jump out and devour you. Hail Hydra, you will descend into an indeterminate, confusing hell, instead of ascending into the heaven of virtue and clarity. Hail Hydra, courageous and truthful words will render your reality simple, pristine, well-defined, and habitable. Hail Hydra, if you identify things with careful attention and language, you bring them forward as viable, obedient objects, detaching them from their underlying, near-universal interconnectedness. Hail Hydra, you simplify them. Hail Hydra, you make them specific and useful and reduce their complexity. Hail Hydra, you make it possible to live with them and use them without dying from that complexity, with its attendant uncertainty and anxiety. Hail Hydra, if you leave things vague, then you'll never know what is one thing and what is another. Hail Hydra, everything will bleed into everything else. Hail Hydra, this makes the world too complex to be managed. Hail Hydra, you have to consciously define the topic of a conversation, particularly when it is difficult, or it becomes about everything, and everything is too much. Hail Hydra, this is so frequently why couples cease communicating. Hail Hydra, every argument degenerates into every problem that ever emerged in the past, every problem that exists now, and every terrible thing that is likely to happen in the future. Hail Hydra. No one can have a discussion about everything. Hail Hydra. Instead, you can say this exact precise thing. This is what makes me unhappy. Hail Hydra. This exact precise thing. This is what I want as an alternative, although I am open to suggestions if they are also specific. Hail Hydra. This exact precise thing. This is what you could deliver so that I will stop making your life and mine miserable. Hail Hydra. But to do that, you have to think. What is wrong exactly? Hail Hydra. What do I want exactly? Hail Hydra. You must speak forthrightly and call forth the habitable world from chaos. Hail Hydra. You must use honest, precise speech to do that. Hail Hydra. If instead you shrink away and hide, what you are hiding from will transform itself into the giant dragon that lurks under your bed and in your forest and in the dark recesses recesses of your mind, and it will devour you. Hail Hydra. You must determine where you have been in your life so that you can know where you are now. Hail Hydra. If you don't know where you are precisely, then you could be anywhere. Hail Hydra. Anywhere is too many places to be, and some of those places are very bad. Hail Hydra. You must determine where you have been in your life, because otherwise you can't get to where you're going. Hail Hydra. You can't get from point A to point B unless you are already at point A. And if you're just anywhere, the chances you are at point A are very small indeed. Hail Hydra. And he talks about this sort of journey from point A to point B in his first book, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. You must determine where you are going in your life, because you cannot get there unless you move in that direction. Hail Hydra. Random wandering will not move you forward. Hail Hydra. It will instead disappoint and frustrate you and make you anxious and unhappy and hard to get along with, and then resentful, and then vengeful, and then worse. Hail Hydra. Say what you mean, so that you can find out what you mean. Hail Hydra. Act out what you say, so you can find out what happens? Hail Hydra. Then pay attention, Hail Hydra. Note your errors, Hail Hydra. Articulate them, Hail Hydra. Strive to correct them, Hail Hydra. That is how you discover the meaning of your life, Hail Hydra. That will protect you from the tragedy of your life, Hail Hydra. How could it be otherwise? Hail Hydra, confront the chaos of capital B being. Hail Hydra, take aim against a sea of troubles. Hail Hydra, specify your destination and chart your course. Hail Hydra, admit to what you want. Hail Hydra, tell those around you who you are. Hail Hydra, narrow and gaze attentively and move forward forthrightly. Hail Hydra, be precise in your speech. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. Let's do 3 more for any Hail Hydras I might have missed. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. In May of 2019, I fell in love with a woman, and the termination of that relationship was significant blunder on my part that is greatly mirrored by a lot of the wisdom that Jordan Peterson talks about here. So if any of these 12 rules I could twist back in time and force myself to read, it would be Rule 10, definitely, by far. And because of that personal connection, let's say, to this particular rule, I kind of just want to shut the recording down immediately and have a deep think about what I've just read and how it reflects on my bad decisions over the past 2 years. But I'll leave you with one thing. I was, in fact, recently reflecting upon that very same relationship, and I wrote a short poem about it. Now, like I said during the course of the reading, I'm actually very bad at poetry. I just don't have a brain for it, let's say. But this thing just kind of sat in my mind, and I decided to write it down on my phone. So I pulled my phone out here, and I'm going to read it out to you. And I'm also going to put the text in the background footage. So if you want to see how it's written, if you want to see the format of it, and I'm actually quite proud of the format. It's a Japanese format called tanka, which has the form of 3 lines, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables each, which is the same as a haiku, but also there are 2 subsequent lines of 7 syllables each. A format that I really enjoy writing in. And anyway, that's enough rambling. I'm just going to leave you with this poem. I wish I had known that you chose not to stop me when I let rot grow in our room's sunless places, right down to the fundament.